Welcome to the College Initiative's ACT Prep video series. This is video 1 of the English section. First, I'm going to go over some stats regarding the English section, after which I'm going to go through some steps on how to be successful for those questions, and finally, you're going to have a quick chance to practice them. So the English section on the ACT has 75 questions, and you only have 60 minutes to do it. That means you've got to move quickly. It focuses on grammar and editing, context, and reading comprehension. So the steps for how to do the grammar and editing questions on the ACT's English section are as follows. First of all, of course, read the question. Now, a lot of times you might feel tempted to read the whole reading passage first and then read the questions, but on this section that's not something that you need to do. After you've read the question and the options, locate the question number in your reading passage. Finally, read the entire sentence that holds that question number, even if it has multiple clauses. Try each answer choice in the blank until one of them makes sense. So here's an example of a section. You can find this on the ACT's website. Again, you're not going to read the whole thing first. That's going to waste a lot of time. Instead, you're going to skip on to the questions. So with the grammar and editing kinds of questions on the ACT, it's just going to say choose the best answer. It's not going to have a stem. And then you're going to be given 4 options. Most of the time a no change will be up at the top, followed by similar sections of text, but might be tweaked by either a verb change or some punctuation. So we see no change. That's always going to be on your grammar and editing questions, and then 3 other options. So we've read the question. We need to find it in our passage. It's right here up at the top, waiting by the back door. So you know that this waiting by the back door is what you're going to either correct or keep the same. Once you've found that, you're going to read the whole sentence. So skip to the top here. I grew up with buckets, shovels, and nets waiting by the back door, hip waiters hanging in the closet, tide table charts covering the refrigerator door, and a microscope was sitting on the kitchen table. So now we've read through the whole thing, and we want to check our answer choices. Now here, it's punctuation, so swapping things out isn't necessarily going to change how it sounds. You've got to rely on your knowledge of punctuation. In the second video of the English section that I make for this, it's going to go over different punctuation usages. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, the semicolon is correct. So that's going to be a no change. Next, we skip on to number 2. Again, it's a choose the best answer. No change, would sit, sitting, and sat. So we locate question number 2 in the passage. Here it is. You're going to notice it's in the same sentence as problem number 1. Again, like I said, you might be tempted to just go through this clause right here, and a microscope was sitting on the kitchen table, to try to correct it, but actually you need to read that whole sentence. I grew up with buckets, shovels, and nets waiting by the back door, hip waiters hanging in the closet, tide table charts covering the refrigerator door, and a microscope was sitting on the kitchen table. So a lot of times the ACT is going to test your ability to figure out what kind of verbs are being used, and I want you to notice the difference here. So we've got waiting by the back door, hanging in the closet, covering the refrigerator door, was sitting on the kitchen table. So do you notice here that change? Waiting, hanging, covering, was sitting. You want to make this here, this number 2, line up with the other verbs in that clause. How do we do that? Would sit? No. Sitting? Maybe. Sat? No. So we see that we're going to pick G here for sitting because it lines up with the other verbs in the sentence. Question 3. Again, it's to choose the best answer, so we find it in the passage. Having studied my mother, that's what we're going to change here, is a marine biologist. So we've located the problem, we've read the whole sentence. We've got to go through our answer choices. No change. Technically, this is grammatically correct, but on the ACT, they're going to want the most succinct sentence that you can put together. So this may not be what we want. B, as my mother's interest is science, she is a marine biologist. Again, technically grammatically correct, but it's not the most succinct thing. My mother's occupation is that of a marine biologist. Not super succinct. Or number 3, my mother is a marine biologist. That's going to be your answer there. D. My mother is a marine biologist. Again, that's because this is the most succinct answer choice that you could have that is still grammatically correct. So, we look at number 4. Our household might have been described as uncooperative. This here might not be a grammar and editing question. It might be a context question. So for context questions, our steps are: read the question. It'll probably say something along the lines of, what does the author mean when she uses the word blank in line blank? Here again, step number 2, read the sentence that has that question in it. Then, before you look at the answers, make a prediction for a word that you would use to replace that context word. This is obviously a context sentence, so it's not exactly going to be the same mechanics, but it's going to be similar. Finally, once you've made your prediction, look at the answer choices. Choose the answer that looks most similar to your prediction. If you don't see one that aligns with yours, read the sentence again. So, our household might have been described as uncooperative. Now remember, we're going from my mother is a marine biologist. Our household might have been described as uncooperative. Our meals weren't always served in the expected order of breakfast, lunch, and supper. Now, you're not wrong to think that this feels out of place, which means that we're going to change it. So which choice would most effectively introduce the rest of this paragraph? So again, this is context because you have to look at this sentence in the context of the paragraph. You have to understand what's going on, otherwise you're not going to be able to answer it. So F, there seemed to be no explanation for why mom ran our household the way she did. This could work because then it's followed by that sentence of, we didn't always follow regular meal patterns. G says our household didn't run according to a typical schedule. Could work as well because we're still talking about meal patterns. H, mom ran our household in a most spectacular manner. Now, I don't think it's spectacular, so I'm going to delete letter H, and I'm going to go with F or G. There seemed to be no explanation for why mom ran our household the way she did, or our household didn't run according to a typical schedule. I want you to look at that again. So, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, supper, everything was subservient to the disposal of the tides. So we actually know why this might not go in the expected order, because we've got the tides right here. So that means it's not going to be no explanation. We do have an explanation. It's because of the tide. So that means it's going to be G. Our household didn't run according to a typical schedule. Number 5, we've got another grammar and editing. So we look at number 5. Everything was subservient to the disposal of the tides. Again, could technically work, but we want the most succinct thing here. Was defenses in the fact of? No. Depended on the tides? Possibly. Trusted in the tides? Possibly. So because it's talking about the tide being low and affecting what mom is doing and what's going on in the household, we're going to say it's probably depended on as opposed to trusted in, because that trusted in is kind of weird there. So it's going to be C. So our key takeaways for the English section: you're going to read the entire sentence when you have to correct a problem. For main point and context questions, you're going to summarize a passage and make a prediction for that answer. That's all that I have for you for video 1 for the English portion. If you know grammar, it should be pretty easy. If you don't know grammar and punctuation, check out video number 2, because that's going to give a lot of explanation on how to use these questions here.